9 a.m. Eastern this Monday morning, and we begin with breaking news. So glad you're with us. I'm Poppy Harlow in New York, and from the president this morning, as he marks 500 days in office, he claims that he has the, quote, absolute right to pardon himself. He goes on to write, but why would I when I have done nothing wrong? This comes after a weekend of extraordinary disclosures, debates, and admissions about presidential powers versus the power of the special counsel. Let's go to the White House. Let's begin our coverage with Caitlin Collins, who joins us there. This just came moments ago from the president. What else can you tell us?
I mean, a stunning statement here, Poppy, from the president openly declaring that he believes he is above the law. The president here saying that he is quoting numerous legal scholars. He doesn't say which ones. And then he says, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But then he adds the caveat, why would I do that when I have done nothing wrong? Then he goes on to say, in the meantime, the never-ending witch hunt led by 13 angry and conflicted Democrats, Robert Mueller is a Republican, and others continues into the midterms. So the president there declaring that he has the power to pardon himself if he does so choose. That argument that was being made by his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, yesterday in several interviews, one where Giuliani stated very clearly what their thinking on this is when he said essentially that the president could shoot the former FBI director James Comey if he wanted to. Rudy Giuliani told the Huffington Post if he shot James Comey, he'd be impeached the next day. Impeach him, and then you can do whatever you want to do to him. So Giuliani making the argument there that while the president is the president, he would be above the law if he did something as serious as shoot the former FBI director. But then once he was impeached, then he could get in trouble for shooting James Comey. Quite an unusual comment for Rudy Giuliani to make, but that came on the same day as he was making these arguments about the president's sweeping constitutional powers and what the president's legal team sees this as. Now, Poppy, this is something we have long suspected is the thinking of the president and his legal team, but here we are now hearing it just out in plain language from the president himself.
And you asked Kellyanne Conway, the advisor and senior counselor to the president, about this. Point blank, why does the president think he's above the law? What did she just tell you?
Yeah, we saw Kellyanne out here on the north lawn of the driveway just minutes after the president made this stunning statement on Twitter. And I asked her, why does the president believe that...
Pardon myself. I mean, try to picture an ordinary criminal who committed a crime saying that. I can do whatever I want, and by the way, I'll pardon myself. You sound like you're guilty when you say that.
By the way, Steve, there is an outrageous hypothetical that was thrown out there by the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, in an interview last night to the Huffington Post. And let me read you the quote. He said, if he, the president, shot James Comey, he'd be impeached the next day. Impeach him, and then you can do whatever you want to him. He was saying, look, even if the president shot someone, and he chose James Comey, we know the president doesn't have much care for, he still couldn't be prosecuted. Any legal basis in that?
Well, Poppy, as you know, there are these conflicting legal analyses, one by the Justice Department and one by Ken Starr, back when he was the independent counsel investigating Bill Clinton, about whether a sitting president can or cannot be indicted. It's an open question, but I think it's important that we step back for a second. I mean, the purpose of these letters that we discovered, that we learned about over the weekend, was basically the president's legal team telling the special counsel, we don't have to comply with your investigation. We don't have to meet with you on your terms because we have all of these greater powers. Basically, the greater includes the lesser. And Poppy, there's a basic flaw there, which is even if the president's right that he has these extraordinary powers, and I think Paul is quite persuasive that in many cases he's not, he hasn't exercised them. And so until and unless he does, why they think they can threaten the special counsel and try to basically bully him into not sitting down with the president, I think is really the big perspective
Which seems, it's one thing and notably different for them to sort of bully the special counsel in the court of public opinion on cable news, for the president's surrogates to do that. It's another thing for the lawyers to do it in that letter directly to Mueller, which is what they did. Guys, talking about Mueller, the president just wrote this, quote, the appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional, despite that we play the game because I, unlike the Democrats, have done nothing wrong. Paul Callan, Is the appointment of the special counsel unconstitutional?
No, it's totally constitutional, and I wish he would learn how to spell the word counsel. He misspells counsel in that tweet.
Yes.
Something that's such a focus of his life. You know, a president who's claiming that he has no right to be investigated, that he would pardon himself if convicted, that he can commit an obstruction of justice, that's a president who doesn't understand politics or the law, because it's bad politics and bad law to claim such things.
Steve, remind us why the appointment of the special counsel, Bob Mueller, is constitutional.
Sure. I mean, so the special counsel was appointed consistent with both the existing statutes governing the Justice Department and with regulations issued by the Attorney General under the president's name. You know, Poppy, there's already been one court challenge to special counsel Mueller's appointment by Paul Manafort. That was rejected by a D.C. federal judge, Amy Berman Jackson, in a 37-page opinion last month. So, you know, this argument is out there, I think, among really far-right conservative legal thinkers. It's really not much of an argument. It's one the courts have already considered, and it's one they've already rejected.
The fact that clearly the president's team lied about who dictated that initial statement about the Trump Tower meeting, Paul Callan.
Well,
it's not illegal to lie to the public, but lying to the public was included in the articles of impeachment against Nixon and against President Clinton. So legally, how does that shake out?
Well, you know, I'm not sure, first of all, who's responsible for the lie. The president could very well be responsible for the lie and could have communicated this to his legal team. And I will say, as a lawyer, I would never go out on a limb and make a statement that was made, say, by Sekulow about, and that was an explicit statement, that the president had nothing to do with dictating this. Now, a lawyer would go back and speak to the client and say, listen, I'm going to make this statement on your behalf. So I think clearly the president was involved in that. And is it relevant? Yes, it's highly relevant. And indictments in the past for cover-ups and obstruction of justice, frequently the public position that is articulated is used in the prosecution to show that there was a propensity to lie, to try to obstruct an investigation. So this could backfire on the president.
Quickly, Steve, on that point.
Yeah, I mean, it could backfire. I think, Poppy, the million-dollar question here, and I think the thing that we really have to talk more about, is where is Congress and where are congressional Republicans? Because at the end of the day, the Constitution is pretty clear that many of the powers the president now claims he can abuse are supposed to be reined in not by the courts, but by Congress through the power of impeachment.
Thank you both, Steve Vladeck, Paul Callan. Appreciate you rolling with us and all that breaking news that just came in. Historic action or just a meet and greet? What we're learning about the high-stakes June 12th summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un? Is this administration lowering expectations? Also, fighting back, U.S. allies slamming the president's steel and aluminum tariffs, Republicans slamming them as well, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
President Trump following a long-standing Washington tradition and marking the start of African-American Music Appreciation Month, which is interesting coming at the end of this particular week. So I'm going to bring in now Kieran Mayo, the former editor-in-chief of Ebony Magazine, Trey Johnson, a writer with Rolling Stone, and Asia Connors. Asia is the Director of Communications and External Affairs for the Arizona Republican Party. Hello to all of you. Kieran, you first. In a statement declaring June African-American Music Appreciation Month, the president wrote this. He said, "Our nation is indebted to all the African-American artists whose music fills our airways and our homes, lifts our spirits, and compels us to think, dance, and sing. These musicians and their legacies ignite our imaginations and prove to us that the sky is the limit." So I want to be the first to tell you happy African-American.
Thank you
Wish
so
you happy
much.
African-American
I've been
Music
waiting.
Month. So, what do you? I know, right? What do you think?
You know, the empty platitudes. First of all, ghostwriters, right? Hello. Who wrote that for the man? Just the empty platitudes. I remember before being on, and a conservative black person said to me, "Don't speak for all of Black America." And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb. We are over the contradictions. And the way that he plays to us is insulting. So if this is supposed to get brownie points, someone who embodied a kind of bravery that, to me, when he comes against Jay-Z, like he did, and I know we want to talk about that, it smacks of him not understanding the very black music that he speaks of. He does not know the origins of this music, and he does not know the spirit that it comes from.
This tradition, Trey, that started back in 1979 by then President Carter. So the president didn't create this, but it is coming on the Friday of a week where he refused to condemn Roseanne's, I keep saying that, Roseanne's racist tweets and criticize one of the most successful contemporary black musicians, Jay-Z. Kieran just mentioned that. Yeah. It's an interesting way to end the week.
It is, and I think for me, it's like, look, I'm not looking for Trump to give like a blessing to what the contributions and the voice and vitality of black music has been over generations. I think it's right that fundamentally that we're taking time to acknowledge the work that so many artists have contributed to the country and to the music. I think much like what Kieran says is that I think my bigger problem is that like it glosses over so much of how much of that music has contributed to talking about the inequality and pain that has been at the core of the black American experience. And, I kind of did a bit of an eye roll when I read the proclamation too, because ultimately it kind of glosses over, makes a very pretty picture of like what actually has been the content and the substance of a lot of our contributions in music.
Asia, here's what the president said in Nashville this week about Jay-Z performing at Clinton rallies.
The only way she filled up the arena was to get Jay-Z. And his language was so filthy that it made me like the most clean-cut human being on earth. He'd stand up there before those crowds. And by the way, without any musical instruments, I had much bigger crowds than he was drawing.
So, do you think Jay-Z gets any appreciation from the president for this month?
Just because he made a comment about Jay-Z, I don't think we should deflect that the president is honoring and following a tradition to recognize the month of June as an African-American appreciation for music. I mean, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, Don. If the president didn't do this proclamation, if he didn't do it for National Caribbean American Heritage Month, he'd be being criticized for that as well. So I think I'm honored and I'm grateful that the president is continuing this tradition and carrying this on.
Yeah,
as he should.
He could not
I don't disagree though, Kieran, that he's damned if he do. I mean, because if he didn't.
Okay, maybe that's right. A point well made. I think it doesn't matter. In the scheme of things, he calls black men sons of bitches who are the mothers of black women like myself. So I'd rather the president not do that than make proclamations about black music, which, African Americans en masse, if we don't understand anything about our contribution to this country, we certainly understand our cultural contribution. We certainly know the gift that we have given this nation by way of music and
jazz and blues.
Yes, and so while it's a nice idea coming from the source, I reject it, and I work on policy that improves black lives. Let's just keep it right there.
Well, what is interesting too when he talks about Jay-Z or whatever, but what is the number one music? Isn't hip hop the number one? The
number one music among white youth, and it has been for decades. Yeah. And he rallies. First of all, it was just an unfair attack. It was an assault on Jay-Z for no reason whatsoever. It was
to build himself up.
To build himself up. It's always that.
I want you to check out these photos, Trey. This President Trump seems chummy with Ja Rule, with Lil Jon, with Snoop Dogg. There he is with P. Diddy. He loved rappers, and rappers honestly used to love him back in the day. He used to be a name in the hip hop community. How has that changed?
I mean, I think it's changed for a lot of reasons. I think it's changed for the rhetoric that he's put out there about black people and about black life. When you look
there, you see him embracing rappers, and then you see him. I'm just talking about the contradiction there with Jay-Z. But go on.
No, I mean, look, I feel like I've heard a couple of artists talk about how they feel like Trump just kind of got new on them over time. And, I think Trump, much like a lot of white Americans at different times, have looked to seek ways of vetting their own credibility by being black adjacent and in the proximity of black people, because there's a certain cachet around the black American public figure and experience in this country. And I think his ability to kind of leech off of that was advantageous at that time. And Now it no longer serves him because this is not, the hip hop community is not the base that he's looking to speak to nowadays. And I think that's what you hear in some of his commentary about Jay-Z. He has looked past and looked beyond and discarded much of the hip hop community. I'm sure for a lot of those artists that hurts, but we'll keep on keeping on.
AJ, I want to ask you a quick question here because, you know, Kanye got huge backlash after he praised the president, right? And there he is wearing with the hat and everything. Why should other black musicians support this president?
Well, first we can start talking about unemployment and the numbers that came out today. Obviously, the president's pro-growth, pro-jobs is working for the economy. So if black rappers are out there and they have a major platform to push for the black community, then we should be celebrating that.
Such a low bar. It's just, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
It's a low bar to celebrate black unemployment?
No, but he's not solving black unemployment, and we're still at the bottom of the totem pole. Like, why do we take the crumbs and then celebrate it? But it's okay. It's really okay.
Happy
So we don't
African
want to move the
Music
needle.
Month. Thank you all. Thank you. I got to go. We'll be right back. Political commentators David Swerdlick and Matt Lewis. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. Happy Friday. David, so let's start with you. Dinesh D'Souza is a man who hates Barack Obama. He basically has a whole movie criticizing Barack Obama. Is that the real reason why he was pardoned by President Trump?
So, Don, I think this is at least a reason why President Trump feels this affinity for Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh D'Souza started out as this sort of interesting anti-PC young conservative of color way back in the 90s, and he's become sort of this caricature of himself, right, with these unhinged critiques of President Obama. Obama, a moderate, centrist Democrat, someone who's like a Gerald Ford or an H.W. Bush. And D'Souza, in his book in 2010, in his film in 2012, Obama's America, tried to paint him as a radical anti-colonialist. Mind you, what's wrong with anti-colonialism, right? George Washington was also an anti-colonialist. But it was all of this piece trying to put him in people's minds of being attached to his father from Kenya, et cetera, et cetera. And Trump, with his birtherism, they are sort of working on parallel tracks here, and I think that's part of the appeal.
Two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
Evgenia, you profiled D'Souza in jail in Vanity Fair, and he says that he was targeted because of his anti-Obama movie. Take a listen.
No American in our country's history has ever been indicted, let alone prosecuted, let alone locked up for doing what I did. There's just not a single case. And so what happened here is that Obama and his team, Eric Holder, Preet Bharara in New York, these guys decided to make an example of me. And I think that the reason for this was Obama's anger over my movie that I made about him.
But that's not true, is it? Because he even pleaded guilty.
It's not true. He did it. He basically, what he did was he paid straw donors and wanted to give to his former college classmate who was running for Senate. He said, you pay her he had reached his limit, and he said to a couple of other people, you pay her $10,000, I'll pay you back. And among those people were his assistant and his lover and his lover's husband.